Okay. So, yeah, so Daily, tell us first, what motivated you to write the God Games? What inspired you to actually begin this? Because I know I think this is a trilogy of three books. So, how'd you get started with all of this?
It was 2008, and my beautiful daughter Becky passed away unexpectedly. She and I, and my daughter Debbie, and my daughter Shannon had been discussing for years the possibility of hell and what it meant, and heaven and what it meant. When she passed away, I decided that I would take all the ideas and thoughts we had and write them down for my grandchildren and their children. This is my first time. It may be a little rough, but we'll get through it. I was going to just give a brief note about the meaning of the book. The God Games Heaven and Hell is an allegorical fantasy science fiction tale which finds Anne Nelson, who is in heaven, preparing her new life game. And a life game is one lifetime on the planet that you choose. Anne chooses Earth. Anne must also choose her complexion, her sex, and sexual preferences, her family, and the challenges and goals she will face. Anne's main goal is to find the life game code, which can guide her to eternal life and infinite unity with her soulmate, Ed Nelson. Anne's new life game, which is called Hell, because that's what it resembles. She has significant challenges: adoption, mental illness, and poverty among them. Will Anne discover the life game code, win her new life game, and be forever reunited with Ed? Or will she lose her life game and then must go through another life game without Ed by her side? Anne learns the answer to these questions when she returns to heaven again and is judged by her own words and deeds.
Okay, so, all right. I was muted. Did you have anything else you wanted to say after that before we move along regarding, what inspired you and motivated you? I know it's I think it's rare for families to talk about the sort of things that you cover in the life games. And I think it's just wonderful that you and your daughter were able to, talk about them and that she assisted you in coming up with or sharing some of these ideas about what are we doing here? What is heaven? What is hell?
Right. Um, in I first wanted to say two things. I support all belief systems that come from love. And in the book, I refer to God by the name One. I'm hoping to speak to people of all belief systems, and every nation, every language has a different name for God. And so I decided on just using one because he's one being.
Well, it's interesting. I know, have learned from, and communicated with, and consider myself to be what would be called a shaman, a medicine woman, a healer. I'm an ordained minister. And anyone who is sort of connected to being a light worker and understanding energies, um, such as you describe in your book, um, might say that you channeled this book. And what do I mean by channeled? Um, I think about you and your daughter and your conversation, but there's so much in here that is just so beautiful and real. And as a person who's had a near death experience, part of the reason why I cried when I was reading the first part of your book is because there are things that I remember that you describe in this book. So I feel like you're a channeler from one, so to speak. How or do you feel comfortable with these kinds of terms about yourself?
Yes, I have thought those things without really understanding what they meant. But yes, the book, the name of the book was, I was told the name of the book, The God Games, which I thought was a little startling, but he's often startling. And I lost my train of thought. Would you refresh?
Yeah, that's quite all right. Um, this we're just going with the flow here. If
Mm-hmm.
you forget something, fine. We'll move on to something else, or we'll get back to it. Whatever
Okay.
needs to happen happens. Let's keep this light and you know.
Yeah.
So, well, how do you receive? Like you said, you were given by one the God games. Uh, do you meditate, or do you just go about your day and you'll hear something without being in like a position or something like that?
Well, the Holy One seems to have quite a sense of humor, and he he usually says things when I'm in the middle of washing clothes or something, and he'll say, "This, Daveline, is what you need to say next." And the one thing that he's given to me to say is that God loves you just as you are right now. That is the message of the book.
Okay, so why don't we actually hear you read from a chapter that you've selected to share with us? We're going to try and get in three chapter excerpts. And I have written down here that you're first going to be reading from Elephant, pages 9 through 13. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right.
Uh, this is going to be chapter 2. It's called The Elephant in the Room, which finds Anne Nelson, who's in heaven preparing for her new life game. The Elephant in the Room tells the story of Anne's beginnings on Earth as told by her birth mother, Loretta Becker. I am a bastard. I was informed of my position in life by my birth mother, Loretta Becker, when I finally found her in 1979. This is, she said, the story of how you came to be born. Loretta Becker. It was October 28th, 1943 at 10:30 p.m. and the end of a long day for me. The minutes dragged on like hours, yet our final customer was still spending time trying to pick out a carton of cigarettes. I'd seen this young man before, a nice kid, newly stationed here in Walla Walla, Washington, but all I could really think about was my baby girl, your oldest sister, Jamie. My muscles and feet were screaming out for rest. It had been a week since Mom and Dad, down with influenza, had been able to come into the store. Finally, the young customer brought me his pack of cigarettes and a Hershey bar. His name was Daniel Lee, and he'd become a daily or twice daily customer since arriving in the Army garrison outside of town. He politely asked after Mom and Dad and the farm, and I answered in saying on first one leg and then the other. I tried hard not to show my impatience, but I could tell when Daniel opened the door that it was bitterly cold, and I had a long walk home. Daniel paused a moment at the door and said, "Have a good night, Mrs. Becker." When the door slammed shut, I grabbed my coat and closed the store. As I stood on the stoop, gathering my courage, the wind clawed at my legs and went whistling around the gas pumps. The thermometer said that it was only 23 degrees. I steeled myself and stepped out into the pre-Halloween night. The farm was 3 miles out of town, and family members walked back and forth from the farm to the store every day. With World War II and the rationing of rubber and fuel, it just seemed to us that it made more sense to walk. But that night, I was really wishing for a car. And so the other side conspired to give me what I desired. The fierce wind whipped my skirt and coat around me like maple streamers. Fighting the gusts, I walked over a mile on the rutted country road when suddenly the dark night was split open by a splash of bright light, and a little Model T Ford came up behind me and honked. I recognized the car right away because its owner had been my last customer. It was Daniel Lee, and I wondered why she'd be out on my road so late at night. Daniel pulled up next to me and asked if he could give me a lift. Didn't see any harm. After all, he was a nice, mannerly young man, and it was just a couple more miles down the road to home. I thought about my husband, Wayne, who was also in the Army, but stationed in Hawaii. I believed that he'd understand my situation. "Sure, I guess it's okay," I answered, relieved at the thought of getting home and warming up again. "You look decent to me. And besides, Dad will have your neck if you misbehave. You know how he can be when he gets riled up." "You don't have to worry about me, Mrs. Becker. I'll get you home safe and sound." And I quickly climbed into Daniel's car and we began rattling down the road. It was a bumpy ride, but at least it was a lot warmer. Suddenly, the car hit a pothole, and there was a loud bang as the right front tire blew apart. Daniel wrestled for control of the car and braked it to a shaky stop. The car rocked a little, but seemed in good shape. Daniel carefully helped me out of the car, got the tools out of the back end, and jacked up the right front side of the car. "Might want to sit on the grass here, out of the wind," said Daniel kindly. The grass was frost crystals, so he swept a place on the ground with his hands and put his uniform jacket down for me to sit on. I was grateful for Daniel's thoughtfulness and sat and watched him change the blown-out tire. It was quick. As I watched, he ratcheted down the last lug nut. What I didn't in that moment realize is that he'd also ratcheted down his clutches. Suddenly, Daniel turned around and flung himself on top of me. My head hit a rock as Daniel pushed me down and overcame me. I was a farm girl and worked on the family vehicle, so I was strong. He began to thrash around and rain sharp blows upon his head and shoulders. Daniel punched me hard in the face. My neck snapped, and I was flung backwards, immediately unconscious. Taking advantage of my state, Daniel ripped open my shirt and slip, pulled off my skirt and underwear, and attacked me. October 28, 1943, 11:30 p.m. A short while later, I came to my senses. I was almost frozen. My face was swollen. There was a sharp pain in my neck, and worst of all, I was very much aware that I'd been raped. Daniel, his jacket and his car had disappeared. So I gathered my disheveled clothing, dressed, and began the walk home. My heart was shattered. What would I tell Wade? Would he divorce me when he came home? What about our baby Jamie? How could I ever let her know? I didn't know anything for sure anymore. Mom and Dad put me to bed, but they stayed up all night. Dad continued pacing, and with each step he took, he imagined crushing and vilely cursing at a crowd. Mom continued to knit, dropping every other stitch and cringing at Dad's behavior and choice words. Mom and Dad let me sleep for 2 days as they took care of both the farm and the family store. The second day, I slowly came awake to a constant throbbing pain, and like the empty socket left after a tooth has been pulled, and it's almost impossible not to stick your tongue in the socket, I couldn't keep my mind from probing the hole in my heart. I got out of bed, though, and faced life squarely. My heart had the weight of lead, but I looked in the mirror after smiling. I need to go into the store today and relieve Mom. The customers will see my face all black and blue. Say that I tripped over a rock on my way home the other night, but I must tell my story or laugh at myself for being so klutzy. No one must ever know what happened the other night. People talking to me so cruel. They'd all think that it was my fault, that I was a wanton woman, and had pushed myself onto the young soldier. There are times when lying is necessary, required even to survive, necessary to protect a family's reputation. Jamie standing in the church in town, my parents' ability to hold their heads up high in the community. Single lie I had to tell. My conscience troubled. I was able to lie successfully, and my bruised face soon left everybody's minds to be replaced with the newest local gossip. Next month dragged by for me. It seemed forever to get over 30 days. My family members clammed up about my horrid experience. So it seemed like a huge gray elephant sat in the middle of the kitchen table, and everybody just reached around to get the mashed potatoes and gravy. The elephant in the room trumpeted and disappeared. I told Mom and Dad that I was pregnant. Mom dropped the skirt onto her lap. Dad threw his newspaper on the floor, got up, and began to pace. I held my breath and waited for the inevitable turmoil. Blast it to hell, Dad yelled. How come us? We pay our tithes and go to church. How come God's punishing us? Don't yell, Mom. Do you want the neighbors to know all our business? Mom pleaded. Then Dad finally made the pronouncement that I'd been dreading. You will be on a bus tomorrow, and you will go to San Diego and have this spawn of Satan there. But Dad, what about Jamie? I sobbed. She's so little, I can't just leave her. You should have thought about her before you got into that car, Dad roared. My heart was shattered by Dad's hate and bitterness, but I understood then that he did not care about my feelings. But Dad, I pleaded, I was unconscious. I didn't just let him attack me. What will I tell Wayne? He'll divorce me if he ever hears about this. What should I say when I tell him I have to go to San Diego without Jamie? Dad stood tall in front of me, his face contorted. He spoke slowly and harshly. You'll tell him that we're watching the baby while you go to San Diego and work for the war effort. But you want to be closer to him in case they begin letting wives join their husbands on Hawaii. You'll work and support yourself, and Wayne will send you money every month, which you'll send home to support Jane. Then, distinctly enunciating each word, Dad continued, you must find a way to have this baby and get rid of it. Do you understand? Do not bring this baby home. Mom and I were shaking Dad's hate-tinged words. We clung to each other and sobbed. We both knew that once Dad made up his mind, there was no changing it. Later, the next afternoon, I climbed aboard a crowded, smelly old bus that was the only transportation available and started the freezing stop at every town trip to Southern California. I'd spent the morning with Jamie and told her that I'd be gone for a while, working for the war effort to try and get Daddy on Earth. Jamie was only one, but she instinctively understood that I was leaving her. She frightened her very much, and sobbing, she dove deep into my arms. I cried for the entire 3-day bus trip, but by the time I reached San Diego, I had a plan for it. I went straight to the Brethren Church and asked the pastor if he knew any place where I could stay while I had my baby. Sent me to Sadie Lattisa's home, and Sadie rented me a single room. I quickly found employment and started to work for Ryan Aeronautics as a riveter. I continued to work up until my due date. October 28th, 1943, 11:30 p.m. We are now in heaven with Anne. He says, I was far away from my mother's rape at the time in the dimension of heaven. And in that dimension of light and joy, I was living as the energy form Anne. On the precise evening of Daniel's attack on Mama, at the very instant of conception, a message was delivered to the home of my heavenly Father. The message proclaimed the imminent birth of myself, Anne. My Heavenly Father knew that education must begin immediately to properly prepare me for my next life.
Wow, what an amazing way to start out your book. Um, yeah, because the layout, and of course, we're just covering the first of three parts of the book, is, and I'm going to ask you this question because your book, the genre that it's described as online on Amazon, is fiction, fantasy, and sci-fi. But I know I had the pleasure to read some of the beginning chapters of your book before it got published. And one of the things that struck me was that I felt the beginning of the book, such as like the chapter that you read, it felt like memoir to me. So I remember saying something to you about that. This reads like a memoir. This is sort of a hybrid because you don't call it a memoir because there must be fiction and fantasy and sci-fi in there as well, and people will recognize that. But this is memoir. Am I correct?
You're correct. The first part of the book that we're dealing with today deals with Anne's preparing for a new life on earth. She's in heaven. And if you ever saw the Disney Pixar new movie Soul, you'll have heard of the great before. And that is where she was, the great before going to earth. Please. Here's a question.
Okay, so you're talking about the great before, and I'd ask you about memoir, and that this is definitely memoir, and the first part of the book is really about your own family.
Yeah.
Anne pretty much represents you, and the people, the woman who was raped was your mother, your
Yes.
true mother, and your father. So all of these things are true. So the first part of the book, when you're reading it, folks, is memoir.
Yes.
And then the next excerpt we're going to hear is from the part that's also, well, I guess it's really four parts. We're talking about the first two. The first part is that the memoir part, and then you go to heaven, introducing us as you did just now, and knowing that how she was conceived, and now knowing that, oh, I'm going to be born. It's my turn to go to earth. But before she goes to earth and is conceived, in your story, in quote unquote heaven, there are all these choices to be made
Yes.
before we're actually born. And um, uh, okay, so uh,
So the first part is a fantasy about what pre-heaven, what pre-earth life is like. Hell, the middle part of the book, is a personal memoir. It is a true story.
ah,
And then it ends in fantasy again. What happens after we pass away and go back to heaven? And what is it like then? So it is a fantasy on the front and in the end, and in the middle is a memoir.
that is so amazing. I don't know if there's ever been a hybrid book written like this that is upfront part parts that are pure memoir, and other parts that are fantasy sci-fi, which is sort of saying, do we really know if this is fantasy or sci-fi? Because there are people who will read these descriptions and they're going to identify and believe that this is the truth. So, anyway, why don't we move on to the sci-fi fantasy part, where Anne has to prepare to come to Earth, and the reading is from the chapter "The House of Sexuality." Correct?
Correct.
This is good stuff. All right.
I'm
I'm
finding
going
it.
to read along with you.
I will be reading from chapter 7. Our friend Anne is in heaven preparing for her journey to earth, and she has met her guardian angel and best friend forever, Glenna. Glenna is going to walk and through all the houses of free earth, including the house of sexuality, where she chooses her gender and sexual proclivity. Excuse me a second. Okay. Chapter 7, The House of Sexuality. Glenna and I stepped out of the World's Possibles building into a glorious, light-filled morning with the birds and flowers singing Hallelujah chorus. The building we were approaching was small, with a roof of yellow topaz. It didn't look frightening. I looked over at Glenna, and she had a very intense face. The sign on the building in pure gold said, House of Sexuality. Glenna held the door open for me, and we entered a long hall. Around the sides of the hall were benches upholstered in red velvet. We took a seat to one side, and I perused the walls on both sides of the hall, while Glenna dipped into a little golden box of chocolates she had taken from the road. The walls were paneled in solid oak. On the left wall was a large golden circle with gold lines marking each of its 360 degrees. Above the circle, was a sign that said the sexes. At the top of the circle, at the 360-degree mark, was the word male. And at the bottom, the 180-degree mark, was the word female. On the right wall was another golden circle with gold lines marking each of its 360 degrees. Above that circle was a sign that said degrees of sexual attraction. On the top of the circle, the 360-degree mark, were the words male, to, and a colon. And at the bottom of the circle, the 180-degree mark, were the words female, to, colon. Further along the hall, on both sides were closed doors. It was all quite mysterious, and I looked over to Glenna for an explanation. Glenna caught one and gave me a little chocolate smudge grin to reassure me. She dabbed her lips with a hanky and said, and this is one of the most important buildings of all. For here you will define your sexuality in this new life game. Past lives, you've chosen different ways to express your sexuality. At times, you've chosen to be a man, and at times, you've chosen to be a woman. Many times, you've chosen degrees in between the strictly 360-degree mark or 180-degree mark, but generally, you've chosen to express sexuality in such a manner that your goals for your life game would lead you to a win of the game, it's important to remember that one creates all expressions of love and attraction, is all expressions of love and attraction, all degrees of maleness, femaleness. Nothing exists outside of one. Well, Hannah, I don't understand what you're saying. I'll have to trust you. The door on the left opened, and an exceptionally beautiful young woman came out and approached her. My dear, welcome to the House of Sexuality. I'll be your guide. My name is Shannon, and you must be Anne. Yes, I responded and rose from the bench. I noticed that Glenna remained seated, eating out more chocolates, and I turned to her and asked if she was coming also. Shook her head no, and then added, I'll wait here for you. Shannon will take good care of you. Shannon reached for my hand and led me gently into the dimly lit room behind the left side door. This room was almost empty, except for a small desk and chair and a separate computer in front of a really nicely cushioned chair. It looked kind of empty and added to the sense I had of the puzzling nature of this building. Shannon motioned for me to sit at the desk chair in front of the computer, and she sat at the desk and turned to look at me. On the walls around Shannon's desk were pictures of children of all ages, all different kinds of clothes, and with different backdrops. I asked Shannon who the children were. There must have been 100 pictures, and she told me that they were the pictures of the children she had given birth to in her various lives, or that she had fathered. Her statement confused me. My dear, said Shannon, I'm sure you must be unnerved by what you see in this building and in this room. I remember my own fears. Have you chosen to be a woman in your next life game? Yes, I have. Ed and I plan to meet in our new life games and get married. It's good that you've already made your major decision in this area. In this room, you'll decide what degree of maleness, femaleness you'll choose. You'll be playing a computer game in which you'll choose which attributes you need to accomplish your goals in this life game. It's an amazingly simple choice game. You'll be shown a list of attributes and characteristics, and you'll choose which attributes and characteristics you need to construct your personal identity in this life game. There are no wrong or right attributes. Just choose any or all that you'd like to have. Some attributes are largely male. Some attributes are largely female. But most attributes are shared by both male and female. However, they may be expressed in slightly different ways. Your task is to sit at the computer and study the attributes that are shown on the screen. If you like the attribute, you'll click yes in the box of that attribute. On this attribute, you'll simply hit the return button, and the new screen will show the next attribute. Do you understand these instructions? Yes, your instructions are clear. I think I understand all that you said. But if I have any questions, where will you be? I'll be right here if you need. Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it quickly. I tripped around in a chair and looked at the computer screen. On it was the first attribute, and I began to mark off the attributes I'd like to have for this new life game. There were many that I chose. The list was about 200 attributes long. I chose bearing children and raising them as the greatest goal. Then having plenty of compassion, benignity, a loving attitude, understanding of others, and keen intuition. Next, I chose to have ambitions, speed and decision making, an understanding of math and logic, penchant for risk taking and child protection, and great strength. There were many other choices that I made, but these were the ones that I felt strongest about. When I'd finished the list, there were two other questions to answer. Are you comfortable with your choices? Do you want to review your list? I answered yes to the first and no to the second. And I turned and faced Shannon. First time I noticed a little silver box on the desk in front of her. What's next, Shannon? Well, Anne, in a few minutes there'll be a printout of your aggregate score, and you'll know what degree of the 360-degree circle of the sector that you fall under. Then I'll explain the results to you. In a little while, there'll also come out of the silver box a silver disc that contains information from this tab and in your next step. But as she spoke, I could see a printout coming out of the silver box. She gently removed the paper and looked at it. Her heart was beating like crazy. I didn't really understand the point of all that, so I couldn't begin to know what to expect next. Well, Anne, dear, said she, from the little I know of the life game that you're creating, I think you'll be very pleased. And I think you'll understand the results of this. Here, you are going to be 220 degrees on the circle of maleness, femaleness. You are a strong 180-degree female, but you are also 40 degrees male. This can mean that you have the strengths of a woman and will be able to bear a large family. Also, you've chosen to be augmented by several usually male attributes. You've chosen an exceedingly difficult game to play, and that you'll need to have a great many different strengths to win your game. Yes, Shannon, I almost wish that I could be male to handle all of my challenges. But it's clearly my choice for your children. And most of the female attributes appeal to me the most. Is it weird to be a mix of male and female? Did I make strange choices? No, Anne. You've made good choices for the circumstances you'll choose for your picking. And if it'll help you to understand, know that almost all persons end up with a mix of the male-female attributes. Annie, dear, I think that I'm understanding things less and less. How does all of this affect who you're attracted to in life? That's a very good question, Anne, one that's going to be answered for you in the next step. And at that very moment, a little silver disc came out of the silver box on Shannon's desk. Here it is, said Shannon. Now we just go over to the next room and I'll explain all this to you. And with that said, we left the first room and walked toward the door across the hall. I glanced over to Glenna as we crossed the hall, and she shot me a look of encouragement.
Oh, wow. That is just amazing. I'm sitting here listening to you, and I just want to say, What a perfect day to be reading about the House of Sexuality. Happy Pride to anyone who's celebrating Pride Day today, which, if this is true, we all chose our sexuality from the House of Sexuality, which also is fun because in the sort of the LGBTQ plus world, um, there's a show now called Pose, and it's about the houses in the community where mainly uh, drag queens or set, but not just drag queens, but various people in the community um, participate in these houses. And usually a house is run by a mother, and the mother takes in young people who are not accepted, many who live on the streets, and they attend and practice um, to participate in these dance balls. And and there are many houses. The House of Extravaganza, usually named after the mother, for instance. So again, happy Pride to anyone who's listening from the House of Sexuality and the God Games. Thank you for that reading. I want to switch for a little bit and go back to the beginning of the book. I want to talk about or ask you about the preface, because in the preface, you talk about, I'm going to say, one of the inspirations, motivations, guides for the God Games, who is Dr. George Washington Carver. And I want to just read something briefly that you've written in here in the preface. It says, Dr. George Washington Carver, the man who talked with flowers and always wore a flower in his buttonhole, accomplished a great deal in his 81 years. He discovered over 800 uses of the peanut, sweet potato, cotton, and other plants, and by lectures and demonstration, helped the South to recover and flourish after the Civil War. President Franklin D. Roosevelt requested that Dr. Carver come and speak before Congress. That lecture helped change the course of agriculture in America and the whole world. The insidious side of this honor was that because of the Jim Crow laws, Dr. Carver was delivered in a dumbwaiter to the floor of Congress. Jim Crow laws made it illegal for him to climb the stairs to that auspicious chamber. Dr. George Washington Carver's innate dignity and unparalleled perseverance in the face of extreme odds has made him an American and my own personal hero. Without his influence in my life, I would never have finished this book, which took 12 years to complete. And then you thank Dr. Carver. And, think about uh, this part of your book, which is about, all the things that you have to choose before you come to this earth. I think about Dr. Carver and his life, just some of the things that you said, all the choices, if we want to go with that, which we do, um, because of the book. Um, all of these things happened in his life. And, we have right now, we don't want to get too political, but there are threats to voting rights right now in this country. And, so he experienced it in his time, and we're experiencing in our time. Um, what do you think the benefits would be for this book to people who are living today? Because we talked about him in the past. If you want to say a few words about, well, you already said pretty much why he's your hero. People can read it in the preface or one of your heroes. Um, but what does this say about our time, the God games?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Okay, so let me let me rephrase this. When it comes
Okay.
to um, young people, for instance, I know you're very
Yes.
keen to have young people read this book because a lot of young people, I think, feel um, cheated by, I'm going to say, our generation, boomers. Um, I have nieces and I talk to them, and they're not too happy with how things are going right now, and kind of feel like we dropped the ball on this. Will this help them to cope with their feelings of, I don't know, betrayal, um, concern about our times? Do you think this will help young people if they read this book?
I pray so because that's one of my greatest hopes. Young people today are the most magnificent generations of people. Um, Starting back with the silent generation, baby boomers, the millennials, Generation Z, Generation Alpha, and every generation comes ever more spiritually minded, all the more wanting to have freedom for all people, everybody to have their own personal right to be able to live as their conscience dictates. Young people of today have a mighty vision and they have passion and they care whether these things change. And I think this world is going to be a Gan Eden, a Garden of Eden, as we watch these younger generations live their lives and make so many changes that will make this world centered in love, not hate. I really have a lot of faith in the younger generation. They're just marvelous. They have all this strength and passion, and they outspeak, and they allow people to be who they are. I think they're wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I also agree with you. I have a lot of faith in young people, and it's well, it's still all of our turn to contribute what we can during our life game.
Yeah.
But they have more time, looking as where we are now, and I'm just amazed at what you described about young people, and it's almost as if they're living the house of sexuality now, because they're making all these changes about identity and
Yes.
saying, the constructs that you've put on us are antiquated and they don't fit and they're
Right.
not real and they don't serve a higher purpose at all, to put us in a box and try to force fit us to say we're this or that or the other. And in fact, they've expanded it with terms like pansexual and non-binary and so many others that are added to the male female. And when people read your book and they read about how those choices are made in your fiction sci-fi part of the story, I think young people, guys, if you're listening, you're going to really love it. And it's going to make so much sense. And maybe you'll see the connections as to why possibly, you're the generation that's making this happen. So I want to switch back to having you read the last excerpt, which is from the House of Cosmetics. Tell us about the House of Cosmetics. Well,
Uh, the chapter 12 is called The House of Cosmetics. And in chapter 12, Anne has traveled already through 7 houses where she has made growth. She's learned about her genealogy. She's planned her life, the goals and challenges she's going to be facing. She chooses her children, her parents. she chooses, sorry, she, let me read that again. She will encounter during her soon-to-be birth on earth. And what she finds is that hell is this life we live on earth. This is where we're challenged and have to make choices that make us who we are and what the future of this world is. And I have lost where I'm at, so I will begin reading chapter 12. The House of Cosmetics. Everybody in the great before, quiet places where they can go and meditate and think and try to decide what choices they're going to make. And Anne had gone back to visit her quiet place because she had all these ideas that were new to her to think about. And in the chapter 12, she has just come back from her quiet place, and Glenna welcomed her with roses and a big smile on her face. Were you able to rest in your quiet place? Glenna asked. Oh, yes, it was very relaxing, and I was able to put all of my recent experiences in order. The short time I was there, I was able to clarify in my own mind where I'm going to be going and what I'm going to be doing while on earth. I really feel that I'm almost ready to step into my new life game. That's incredibly good news to me, Anne. Now, let's prepare to go to the House of Cosmetics. This is going to be a real treat for you. It's an incredibly positive and surprising experience. Oh, good, let's get going. We began our hike to the House of Cosmetics. We were almost overcome by the sweet aroma of orange blossoms coming from a nearby grove. These rows of orange trees were singing the habanera for Carmen. Soaked this beautiful music up and continued walking down the cobbled streets to a large square building with a jade roof. The building had huge wooden doors, and above them was a rainbow-colored sign that said, House of Cosmetics. Glenna opened the door, and the smell of buttered popcorn wafted out. We entered what looked like the snack bar of a large modern theater. People were waiting in line for a huge variety of goodies, and Glenna motioned me over to a line on the left that seemed to be moving smoothly. From the talk around us, I got the impression that everyone was as surprised as I was to find themselves inside a movie theater. And we were all loving it. When it was our turn, Glenna and I ordered popcorn with lots of butter, orange juice, and chocolate mints. Following the crowd, we made our way into a large and very ornate theater. We found seats in the middle of a row and settled down to wait. We learned in a movie theater. Well, I didn't know, but my curiosity was sure. Suddenly, the lights dimmed and the curtains slowly opened. A multitude of drums rolled and a rainbow appeared on the screen. A rich, cultured middle voice said, Welcome to the House of Cosmetics. You'll be experiencing an unbelievably beautiful movie today. You'll be seeing scenes from many planets that the cosmos. On all the planets, you'll notice that there is one universal message. One loves color in everything he creates. I felt a mist rising from the floor and engulfing us as the screen filled with scenes of the skies over many different planets. A storm was brewing on the planet Zion, and its purple sky was streaked by a delicate shade of pink that turned slowly to a rose red. The storm arrived with passion and turned the rose red sky black with heavy clouds of brown and gray. Surge of heat climbing my body, while on the screen was showcased an early morning sunrise on the planet Tago. A shower of light sprinkles, gold, orange, red, and purple, exploded across the screen over a deep blue sky. As quickly as the sunrise turned into a blazing disk, the scene changed to twilight on planet Lem, with a magnificent sunset of pink, red, purple, gold, and green, saying hello to a dark blue sky. There was an increasing cold creeping about my shoulders. It was quickly followed by gardenia-scented clouds of warmth. River had planted to see if she was also experiencing this assault. Her expression of awe told me she was. Suddenly, our seats began to rise, and we went soaring through the skies over magnificent mountain ranges and deep valleys. The mountains ranged in color from deep purple to blue, green, brown, yellow, orange, black, and red. The valleys were covered in lush greens. Brown and yellow rocks and boulders were strewn about over some areas, and some valleys had deep blue rivers running through. We bounced along rows of apple orchards, undulating waves of forests, and an autumnal scene with the trees all turning vibrant red, orange, and yellow. My spot. We bounced along rows of apple orchards, undulating waves of green forest, and an autumnal scene with all the trees turning vibrant red, orange, and yellow. The experience of a great fire. By this time, my knuckles were turning white from clenching the armrests. When our seats suddenly morphed into tiny submarines as we dove into a magnificent green and blue ocean. Shoals of fish were swimming amongst beautiful pink and red coral. The colors of the fish were bright and varied. And we low into the ocean, where you expect all things to be gray, and saw instead that there were sea creatures and fish of many colors. A few had even evolved into a form that produced light in that vast darkness. And I was amazed that there were colors and light at all in a place so deep, sunless, and out of sight. We shot up out of the sea, my toenails gripping the footrest, and our seats instantly became spaceships traveling from planet to planet in the cosmos. Modulated voice spoke even more slowly and distinctly. When one created mortal bodies for energy forms, he used all the colors of the rainbow. On some planets, blue, green, purple, or orange people are found. On others, black, white, brown, red, or yellow people are found. There are many different forms of human beings, depending upon the gravitational force and atmosphere of the planet on which they're born. I was in total awe. It had never occurred to me how important color was in the worlds that one created. The entire audience was totally into our experience, and we were all disappointed that it had to end. When our seats came to a rest, the movie ended with the sight of a magnificent sunset over a rich savanna. When the curtains closed, a man walked out onto the stage. He introduced himself as George and said that he'd be explaining to us what we were going to be accomplishing in the House of Cosmetics. When you are an adult on the planets you'll be going to, you'll notice that people tend to belong to tribes that look like each other. All persons of every tribe are of equal value and feel and think similarly. There are the positive and the negative persons in each tribe. Each tribe discovers its strengths and weaknesses, its own culture and language, its own music and religion, its own prejudices and fears. These characteristics make each tribe unique and bring further color to their worlds. Today, you will study different cultures, their foods and customs, and get a strong feeling of where you'd be most comfortable in your new life game. You'll then go to the sample room, where every color of skin, hair, and eyes are displayed. You will choose a color and then a tint or shade for your mortal body by standing in front of a mirror and seeing what you'd look like in various combinations. There'll be knobs to turn to adjust shading for each color of skin, hair, and eyes. You'll turn the knobs until you're happy with your choices. At the end of choosing your color palette, you'll be reminded that all these colors are merely cosmetic differences and in no way affect your personal energy. However, your choice of cosmetics will have a strong bearing on the challenges you'll face in your life game. Please relax, clear your mind. Know that you'll instinctively understand the ramifications of your color choices as they apply to your new game. You'll also feel again the experiences you've had before in other life games, and these might tend to influence what you choose today. Try to put such considerations out of your mind and rely on your inner knowledge of what you're planning for this game to guide your choice. Thank you for listening so closely. It's our hope that you'll retain the memories of this program's message as you go out into your new worlds. The lights came up, and Glenn and I sat in our seats for a while to think about what we'd just seen and heard. When most of the people had filed out of the theater, Glenna led me through the exit door into the cultural room for the planet Earth. There were booths set up to represent every culture on Earth, thousands of them. And I wondered how I'd ever find myself in just one of the cultures. Walked into a wall of aromas. Sauerkraut, mushrooms, chili, lasagna, lo mein, tacos, curry, hummus, yogurt, and so many other awesome dishes. And then I saw the chocolate room, and it was filled with these chocolate cosmos cheesecake, cookies, candies, strudel, hamantashes, pies, brownies, and gallons of ice cream with bananas, chocolate sprinkles, maraschino cherries, sliced almonds, whipped cream roll pie. Each booth had samples of the food that culture enjoyed. We walked down many aisles, sampling the foods and observing many of the cultures that were to be found on Earth. And it reminded me that I'd already made many choices when I went to the genealogy building, and that those choices would affect which cultures I could choose between in this part of my preparations. I knew that I would be Jewish, German, English, Scotch, and Pennsylvania Dutch. So we went to those booths to sample their foods and be instructed in their cultures. We decided to choose all 5 cultures to be a part of me. Once I made that decision, I finished. And then it led me into the sample room. The floors were made of green and white marble, and there must have been 1,000 mirrors in these. But then it led me to the left side, where there was a lovely ornate rosewood mirror. On the right side of the mirror, in the rosewood, were 3 knobs. Underneath one was a brass sign that said skin. Another one was a brass sign that said eyes, and one that said hair. This looked like a lot of fun. I knew the range of colors that I could choose between for the various cultures I'd chosen. Two of the categories, eyes and hair, I had many choices. I thought about my game plan and remembered that I must get adopted for my plan to work. Then it told me that there was a lot of prejudice about who was adoptable and who was less likely to be chosen. My heart grew heavy when I thought about the plight of those left up for the state to raise. It was so unfair. Anna said that as hard as it was to imagine, some people choose to be alone, like as I had, and then remaining. I thought that those folks must be so strong to choose to be born. Folks must be strong to choose such a thing. Stronger than I was, that's for sure. I asked Luna what colors and skin colors were the most adoptable. I had chosen to be born into. Linda said that the most adoptable in the country I had chosen to be born into was white Anglo-Saxon. Well, that was certainly limited. I imagine that adoption rolls must be awfully long. Another thing I must tell you is that we're often Lucy, your adopted parents, Protestant Christians, and wouldn't consider a Jewish or Catholic child. So I really don't have total choice in the cosmetics that I choose today. A lot of you want to play the life game you're choosing. So I began turning the knob for skin color from darker to lighter until I came to a light cream color, a little paler than I thought. But it did seem to fit the style I chose. I would have kind of liked a darker tan color skin. That didn't seem to be in the game plan for me. Next, I turned the hair color knob and found that only blonde and red seemed to match my skin color. I chose a certain golden, light reddish hue that some people would call very neutral blonde. I then turned the eye color knob. I was astounded by the many range of colors found in eye color. I finally decided on cerulean blue so that I could be the perfect blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby that so many prospective parents were looking for. Well, there I was, all made up, looking little like my first choice color, which was blue. How would I ever be able to find out about my Jewish heritage? Well, if it's so important to me, I'm sure that I'll find a way to express this. I'd find a way. I said that we were finished in the House of Cosmetics and would soon move on to the House of Goals and Challenges, which indeed would be challenging, but remarkably interesting. And he said, Zina, we'll first spend some time on a long walk around the island. We've seen a great deal of it, but on a very personal basis. Now we'll walk and enjoy the view, and then we'll have some dinner before going on to the next house. Thanks, Minute. You know, the House of Cosmetics made me see that the more choices I make, the more consequences follow them. Indeed, I'm restricted as to some of the other choices I can make as I prepare for my life game. I'm glad I've had many past lives to experience different colors and cultures. I can re-experience them in my memories. And a shocking old look that I could swear was so. That I began a walk.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Oh, wow. I like so hope this is true. I just love it, that description of the House of Cosmetics and what it's for. And well, I noticed that we're getting very close to the time where we need to say bye bye.